looking at art, and it's been very hard for the smaller galleries. So if you notice on the list that I made for all of you, that Ari will give you later, it used to be that gallery shows were for 3 weeks, and now you'll see a lot of the gallery shows are for 6 weeks and 2 months, which is a whole, in fact, there's one, Sean Scully has a show up, is 3 months. So that is a huge shift in how galleries show their work. And the reason being is when you put on a show, it's very costly to put on a show, get all the right work there. And now many, many galleries change the walls and make the exhibition more like a museum exhibition. And people are not spending as much time in galleries as they used to. And what do I mean by that? There are so many galleries in New York, I mean, hundreds, not 100, hundreds, that they realize that they can keep a show on for longer and people will come into the back room and look at whatever they want. So let's say you like Sean Scully. You can buy one not only at his gallery, but at other galleries. So when a gallery gets from a collector some great work, they put it in the back room. It's called the viewing room. And that has become it's a new way for galleries to get specific collectors that they know like certain work. They don't necessarily represent that artist, but you're able to go to that gallery if you have a relationship with that gallery to see the work. The other thing is many exhibitions are sold out immediately. And then the question is, why do you have the show there? It's because it's for education. They want other people to know about that artist. Okay, let's start with the first show where I did, basically these are galleries in Chelsea, the two big neighborhoods now for art. Well, really now there's a third. There is Chelsea, Tribeca, and now Madison Avenue has become a major place for smaller galleries to have spaces. And there is another idea, and I'm sure many of you are in the business world know that sometimes galleries have what's called a lost leader, meaning they set up a gallery and they're not thinking to make all their sales through that gallery, but they can say that that gallery had a show in New York on Madison Avenue. So for instance, Gagosian has 4 different spaces in New York. Some of them are very small, and sometimes they do a show with not as many pieces, but they put it on their Park Avenue space. Hauser and Wirth, David Zwirner, both have smaller galleries up on Madison Avenue, and there they show pieces of artists who are not as well known, either because they were women or because they were Aboriginal or because they were Latin American. So there's a whole new, so if you hear that an artist is showing in one gallery, it's not necessarily, you have to look at where the show is. So let's start off with Jack Shaman. We're starting with a show that I think is really fascinating. This is a show that was in the Met. We're going to look at the video first, Ari, if that's okay with you. He's an artist. He's an artist that was in jail, and you'll hear his story. It's a beautiful show at the Met right now, and he has a show on at the gallery that's closing today. But the show at the Met is still on. So Ari, if you can put on the video first, that would be amazing.
I can't reiterate enough how much the prison system is an every minute, every hour, every day onslaught on who you are as a person and the value that you have in society. My name is Jesse Crimes. I'm an artist and I live in Pennsylvania. Growing up, I was the kid that every other parent told their kids not to hang out with because I would end up getting people in trouble. But I always was a maker, and so I would always create. It was like the one activity that just kind of occupied my time. I remember taking a trip with my art class to the Metropolitan Museum, which was pretty revolutionary for me. I just remember being blown away by the scale of works, the kind of textures of the paint and the objects. From high school, I went to art school, the first person in my family who went to college. Things started to solidify for me there, that other people see value in me. I grew up very poor, and the only way that I was able to make it through school was to sell drugs. I ended up getting indicted for selling cocaine. They really tried to kind of use all of the leverage of the federal system to get me to cooperate. And when I refused to cooperate and snitch on other people while we're awaiting trial for a year, they transferred me to solitary confinement. Solitary created a very deep moment of self-reflection. Prior to that, I had never thought of myself as an artist. I thought of myself as, honestly, a criminal. And I was kind of thinking through everything that had led me to this moment and everything that I need to do to never put myself in this position again. And so in that moment, it was a very conscious decision on my part that I was going to use every single minute of my time to create artwork, because that was the one thing that they couldn't take away from me.
So you get your placement with the laser? Or just by sight?
I've done it just by sight before, but it's definitely better with a...
I would say with laser, just to
Yeah.
make sure we don't have to go back.
Yeah. The year that I was in solitary confinement, I created Purgatory, which is a series of 292 prison-issued bars of soap that have mug shots from my local newspaper with small portraits of celebrities and politicians as a way to complicate the notion of who we view as an offender. The soap is a very specific material of cleansing and purification of these damaging narratives that were being put out into the world.
So here's a tray of ones that have all been pulled out of one of the boxes. But it'd be great if you just want to talk a little bit more about the transfer, like how you actually figured out how to get the image and some of the color to go to the tops of the soaps.
To make the soaps, I would take a full-size bar and I would carve them to match the size of the portraits as they were displayed in the newspaper. You know, we had little AAA batteries that we could get on commissary. And so I took one of them, and my bunk bed was kind of loose on the cement floor, so I was able to lift it up and smash it. And basically created a little cutting device. And to transfer the ink, I took a piece of toilet paper and just kind of wadded it up to make like a stamp. And I would dip that in a cup of water, make the surface of the soap damp, and I would take my finger and rub it until it got a little bit of viscosity, and then I would press the newsprint image on it, and then you are left with the inverse image. I remember having so many of them, and the guards would come and do shakedowns, thinking, oh shit, I need to get these out of here or else they'll get confiscated. And so then I started thinking about how I could actually create something that would ensure that these very delicate slivers of soap could make it through the postal system. And the same way that I was kind of creating artwork as a way to disconnect from the system, other people were playing cards. I would just take a soap and kind of place it over, trace around that, and then cut that out and use that as the template for every card that goes through. Glue them together with toothpaste, and then insert the soap into the container and then cover it with a different face card in that window, because it becomes almost like a prison cell in a way. And so it was a bit of elevating the offender and lowering royalty, creating an equal playing field.
Have you noticed a shift in the sort of readability or legibility of the faces over time?
I think they've actually held up quite well, because it's been, what, over 15 years now? When I began the initial conversation with Lisa, the curator of the show, she had brought up this archive of Bertillon, or effectively the original mugshot.
So these are the Bertillon cartes de visite that will be opposite purgatory, all of alleged, suspected anarchists. This was the standard that Bertillon used when he invented this system, a frontal portrait. And then on the back, you can see all of the measurements. Once you reach a certain age, your bones no longer grow. So if you took a measurement, it wouldn't change over time. And it would have been used to help identify people when they were walking around or at train stations.
Bertillon was using his system very specifically to create a singular way of seeing people. I think just directly kind of hit me in a way that felt very important to contend with this history. The idea that they're like being protected in these kind of cases, I think is like an interesting parallel in the playing cards and how they function to protect the soaps.
One of the nice things about this exhibition is that it gives us a chance to really look back at this archive by Bertillon and to reconsider these individuals, think more about them as human beings and less about them as criminals, especially since many of them probably were not, and to think about how we might correct that record.
Once I got transferred to the federal prison system, I started creating Apocalyptine 1638-9067, a 15-foot by 40-foot artwork comprised of 39 prison bed sheets with thousands of images that are transferred out of the New York Times. It's basically a very big surrealist landscape of everything that happened in the world over a period of 3 years as a way of unveiling and uncovering this kind of mass destruction of people.
We have some of the newsprint photographs that you transferred.
My first attempt to transfer one of these, I made the sheet wet, put the image face down, and it transferred the ink, but it just made the ink bleed. It was not the right viscosity. I looked at the commissary list to see what possible medium I could get, and hair gel was like, oh, well, that's like a liquid, but it still has a bit of tactility to it. And when I peeled the sheet off, it left the exact image.
I think it's so interesting too to see them saved like this and to be able to kind of unearth each of these stories and go back and think about what they meant at the time and how they relate to today, because a lot of them do have so much resonance now. It's what makes Apocalyptine so interesting.
The middle section of Apocalyptine is the Earth section. Everything below the Earth section is the depiction of hell, and that is comprised mostly of commercial advertisements. The Heaven section will depict within each panel silhouetted female ballerina figures with male heads, which depict the executive, the legislative, or the judicial branch. But I don't know if people would see heaven as just being heaven, or heaven could be hell. Because again, all of the images and everything you're seeing is inverted. So that could potentially end up inverting the entire structuring of the system. In utilizing the federal prison bed sheets made in the prison by other people who are incarcerated as slave labor to cover and hide their bodies at night, people can then understand the humanity behind these numbers and statistics. And I think it just radically changes how people engage with an issue. For the new work that I'm making for this exhibition, Naxos, a year or two ago, I started asking people on the inside if they could go out into the prison yard and select the ideal pebble. And I started wrapping them in threads.
So Jesse transferred the ink from apocalyptine onto the threads that dangle and hold the pebbles that were shared with him by incarcerated people around the country. So there's a one-to-one, a sort of mirror image between the threads that hang in Naxos and apocalyptine across the gallery.
Since I came home, both myself and Russell Craig, another formerly incarcerated artist, had created the Right of Return Fellowship, funding formerly incarcerated artists across the country. And we have expanded that into the Center for Art and Advocacy. We are trying to create a system that repairs some of those harms and creates support that they need in order to thrive as an artist. The thing that can't be said
we can
enough
end
about
right
people
here,
who
Ari.
are
We can end
incarcerated
right there.
is that they are.
So I watched my time. This was a very important project to show you. I hope you found it fascinating. When you look at someone like this, I want you to understand that he doesn't talk about Rauschenberg. He doesn't talk about Jasper Johns. He certainly doesn't talk about Hieronymus Bosch but he is trying to tell you a narrative by using symbols that we all know. I think it's a brilliant exhibition. If you have a chance to see it at the Met, I highly recommend it. But this film was also produced by the Met. And not every film, I try and show you films that are no longer than 6 minutes, but I didn't know how to let you hear all this. I think it's breathtakingly talentedly, so well done. And the other thing is, I like that the Met gave him a show, but then showed him something from their collection that most people have never seen before. So when you look at the soap, you think of Art Brut, you think about many different ways of outsider artists doing work. There's something very sophisticated about it, and there's something very timely about it. So now he has a show on at Jack Shaman that you see his regular work. We can show that now, Ari. And by the way, you're all going to get all this information, but you can see how the show is installed at the gallery. Now, this gallery also has more than one space, but you can see the scale. I always love seeing that's the front desk when you walk into the gallery. And you'll see that he does work that is really, when you first see it, it's very seductive. And when you get closer, it changes quite a bit. So can you make that any bigger, Ari? I think you can make it full screen and then you'll see it. He uses all materials that are not, well, they're right on the bottom, right underneath. Keep going down. You'll see that now, full scale. Let's see that. So you can see how he does large installations and he's using materials that are not regular or the way we think about making artworks. If you can go to the side ones and Ari, do you know how to do the whole screen so we're not seeing on the sides? I think if you press that X on the top, right there. No, I guess that's not it. There is a way to make that a little bigger. But you can see he uses very interesting materials. It's 82 by 77 inches. And you can see his surfaces are really quite beautiful. And he uses the color in a very different manner. He uses fabric and parts of doilies on top of the work. So it's not a flat work. All this work that he does is not obviously acrylic on canvas, but he has other materials in there. Now you're going to say to me, but these look so different than the work at the Met. And that is what every artist does. I try to show you videos of work that is similar to the work that you've seen in the video, but it has its own differences. So you'll see on the side here, that's number 9 of 12. There are many different pieces in the exhibition. You can press the arrow on the side. Thanks, Ari.
So it does say that the material he's using, though, is from like prisons. It's from the bed
Yes.
sheets and stuff. That's what he's using in his art.
Yes,
Correct.
he's using that, but he's adding other materials to it now. So what's very powerful to me is, and that's why I wanted to start with this, he's more like an outsider artist than an art school artist. And the other thing that he said that I thought was so profound is that when he was a young person, he was the kid that all the parents said, stay away from. He does very small works and very large institutional size works. What's fascinating too, at the Met, that shows work that he did over 15 years. I love these hanging pieces and all the sculptural elements, which this is the first, go back right there. Those are such beautiful pieces. And they're right behind the front desk. When you go into the gallery, there's a small room on the side that has those. So they installed it very, very well. If anyone has any questions, never be shy. So now we're going from him to one of the most well-known living artists, Lorna Simpson, and a very different show. I tried to play ping pong with your minds, and then we're going to go to Annie Leibovitz and then Sean Scully and Jeff Wall. I wanted to show you that there is no one type of art today. There just isn't. Another thing, I saw somebody wrote that she's going to the Phillips. She lives in Dallas. I'm in a museum in Dallas as well. But if you go to the Phillips, most of the art in a museum, I don't know if you realize this, but only 3% to 5% of any museum holdings is usually up. So I was thrilled when Ari went to Frankfurt. I know they keep my piece up all the time. Most museums, I'm in over 50 museum collections, and usually my work is not up. And that's the same for most museums. Again, I want to make it clear, when you're in a museum collection, that just means they own your work, but your work is not up most of the time. It's just not.
Thank you, Toby. And before we move on, there were some questions about this artist, and the questions were, first of all, people were amazed by this art and the creativity of a brain like this, and someone, and obviously people know we have an issue with incarceration, and we're putting people away. But I think what you've brought to the fore is that within this group we have artists, and so thank you for sharing that. That's what people said. Number two is how.
I want to say one thing before that, Ari. I have worked in the prison system. I just want you to know, how do I know him? I have worked with artists in the prison system that I came, like I'm doing with all of you. I've done these lectures for people who are incarcerated who are artists. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was the question. People had asked, how did you even know about him? I mean, did you learn? Do you know him before the show and you learned it? But did you learn about him because you saw the show and you're like, I'm going to investigate, or you knew about him and then you saw the shows?
I knew about him. I know about many artists who are in jail. I'll be truthful, and I don't even mind that I'm being taped, but I don't like even saying it. I rather work with artists who are incarcerated I don't want to work with people who are artists where there was, how do I say this? I'm being taped. Where there's rape or murder, meaning there are some very brilliant artists who are in jail for reasons because they were in the wrong place in the wrong time, or it was because of violations of drugs, I think about this a lot. This is a long conversation, and I'd rather have this in person than on tape. But I do think there are many people in jail for too long for multiple reasons. And those are the people I try to work with.
You may know, you may not know, but in California, we had on our ballot initiatives about incarceration this year. Two of them. One was bringing back like kind of the 3 strikes rule, and this, which I believe passed, unfortunately, but Beverly Jacobs can tell me in it. But the other is against slave labor, because many of these incarcerated people are working and they don't get paid, and they don't have a choice, actually.
I find that terrible.
But it did not pass in California. So they in other words, they were trying to get rid of that. So he mentioned slave labor. A lot more to say about that subject. We have to move on to other artists. So let's go.
But when I'm in LA and when I'm in Orange County and you want to talk about it, when it's just in a small group, I'd gladly give more information. But I did work with one of my students And it's so nice that Hedda's on here. Somebody in our artist Beta Midrash worked with a woman who was incarcerated for years in a chavrusa. And I'm so happy that she is out, and she did amazing work while she was incarcerated.
Okay.
Hedda, you remember there was somebody in our group that worked with somebody. Yeah. So I find that very powerful.
Great artist. Thank you for bringing him to our attention. Let's move on to our next one.
So she's a much younger artist. She grew up in Brooklyn. She's considered one of the most important contemporary artists. I try very hard to go with all different ages, all different backgrounds, sexual preferences, everything. So now let's go to Lorna Simpson.
You want the video? You want the video first, Toby?
I always want the video first. I'm so sorry. That's from November 2nd till January 11th. That's a show that's up for quite a while. The next 3 shows are up for 3 months. Now, the Tate, if you all want to ask me, how do I pick the videos I showed? The Tate Modern has some of the best videos.
I love New York, and I love Brooklyn particularly. I just like the vibe of it. I like the intensity. I like that it's open all hours of the night. It's a great place to live because of its diversity. I mean, it's a very international city. Popular culture, music, sports, entertainment, the art world. I think all of it for me is of an influence, beckoning me to kind of steal or admire. The work kind of takes these different genres and kind of goes through them, but there's kind of a thread there. So you kind of say the same thing in many different ways over the course of one's life. Everything that I would choose to do comes from the same sort of impetus, the same sort of desire. I had a bunch of ebony magazines actually that were my grandmother's, and one day I was just looking through them, and I don't know, I just kind of came up with the idea of like making collages with them. And then started collecting them.
I hope you
finding
understand why I showed them next to each other.
A lot of the ads from that period kind of were before and after shots. So they're very funny because the women don't look like before and after like they needed a makeup or improvement. It's more like their attitude changes in some kind of weird way. So even like this piece here, it's on a silkscreen on felt piece, and it too is a before and after shot about as a kind of beauty ad. Five-day forecast was done at a time where I had secretarial jobs and all these different kind of receptionist jobs to help support myself as an artist, and the different experiences of kind of being in different work environments influenced the work. So five-day forecast is the events or forecasting what could happen within one's week. It really is about being inspired by something and looking at it and saying to myself, what would make the piece interesting, or what would be an interesting conceptual approach to a particular idea. Sometimes the answer to that is something completely that I've never done before. I just kind of have to succumb to that and go, okay, so now I'm going to do drawing. So great, I don't really draw, but we'll try that. More recently, I've been doing this stuff on analog photography in the 30s to about the 70s of basketball players. Different kind of images that have crop marks for reproduction in a newspaper. I mean, I just think like all these different kinds of marks are really beautiful. You know, it's all risk at the end of the day. I mean, I think I am never sure that a piece works. I mean, I think my relationship to process is such that if the process of making it and thinking about it is interesting and challenging, then that's 90% of the way. And that the end product, well, then that's whatever it is.
Now, the reason I showed you them one by next to each other is they both are non-conventional artists. And what do I mean by that? I was just interviewed about my process, and I actually love to paint and love to draw, but the interviewer said to me, but can you actually render? And I said, I can, but I don't think that has anything to do with making art. And if you think about somebody like Cezanne was not the best at drawing anatomy. And if you look at his pieces, the arms and the legs are sometimes totally off. And I love her statement saying, I wanted to do drawings, and then, well, I'm not that good at doing that. And then you see that she uses silkscreen and uses different ways of working. And what I wanted to say in today's lecture was, we're going to see Thornton Dial after this, and then we're going to see Annie Leibowitz after this. These are all different great artists, not good artists, great artists who have different ways of their language speaking to the larger masses. So now I want to, and she works on a very large scale. I want you to see that Jessie worked on a smaller scale, but look at these pieces now that are in the show. This is at Hauser and Wirth, one of the most important galleries in New York. And look at how large these pieces are. And this exhibition is about beautiful small rocks. If any, I can't read it so carefully up here. Ari, can you read that? It's really interesting, that little statement written in the top.
With their, yeah.
Larger?
Yeah, I can't make the screen larger, but I can read it. With their monochromatic palette of iridescent paint in silvery grays and saturated blacks, Simpson's paintings invite the viewer to contemplate both the beauty of natural forces and the impact of violence that materialize from sources unseen, whether interstellar objects hurtling towards Earth or lethal bullets dispatched from weapons.
So what she was interested in, she did 2 parts of the exhibition. And I want you to understand, I showed you another show of hers. Every artist does a new exhibition, and it's about what they're thinking about then. Now, I don't know if any of you have this, but I got this from my bar mitzvah. It was a little green box that had all different stones and other pieces that didn't have any value in themselves, but came from very different places. And she did the same thing where she took these little rocks and made them into huge paintings. So the scale is totally different than what you're seeing. Do you understand what I mean? So in other words, the rock is this small, like you see my hand right over here, and she makes it an 8 or 10 foot piece. So it changes the way you see it. And what I love what she's doing is she found something, as she said, about her grandmother's ebony magazines, or she finds things and says to herself, like, wow, how can I make this interesting to the viewer? And the same thing goes with the bullet holes. Now you'd say to me, but why doesn't she do it with her other beautiful blues? Like, she very often uses these gorgeous blues. And this show is a very quiet show. I brought many groups to the show, and many of the people saw it and said to me they like her other work better. And I'm saying, well, then you have to buy a piece of hers from 5 years ago. But right now she's very interested in monochromatic color. Can you see them up close? The surfaces are always gorgeous. And what she does is these are using photo silk screens. So in other words, let me explain to you how that's done. You take a photograph of something, and then you can project it and use something called a drum scanner. There's a way to make them very large. But the surfaces are just gorgeous. And she's always playing with how you perceive something that she saw, and she changes the whole scale. Everyone understand that? Now so you're doing a great job, Ari. You're amazing. And they look stunning, and they really look 3-dimensional. So the room is divided into different sections. Let's see keep going down on these. Look, that one's a beautiful, there's the bullet holes. That one you're just going to now there. Ari, if you don't mind reading that again, I can't read it on my screen, it's too little.
Simpson's text-based wall sculpture, Earth and Sky, conceptually connects her meteorite and bullet hole paintings while evoking many of the artist's early celebrated text and image works, and further elaborating on the themes of identity, representation, and authorship that have long defined her oeuvre. I wonder who wrote these. These are such long sentences and full of interesting words. On perpendicular walls, two versions of an excerpt from the aforementioned historical textbook mirror one another. Their pin-mounted letters casting fugitive shadows.
So you have to understand. So one of the things you have to learn, and Ari, I'm happy you're learning, I'm thrilled you're in the program today, is that artists are not only talking to the masses, but they're hoping that you do homework and you do more information about their own work. As you all know, and some of you came to my show at the Eldridge Street Museum, Bloomberg, and he pays for a lot, Bloomberg organization pays for a lot of the Tate films, and they pay for many museum exhibitions. I was interviewed to say 2 sentences about every work of mine. There were 48 pieces in the show, and I talk about each piece. So, and there's a saying in Hebrew, Hamaven Yavin, the wise person understands, but also they give you more information if you know nothing to understand it. So if you came into this gallery and see the words on the wall, you'd say, what is going on? So if you're an intelligent viewer, and by the way, I work hard to pick shows that I think will take you to another place. You do your homework after you see it. So I was hoping that you would see the first 2 artists. One of them was in jail for over 15 years, and he does all his work about that. And she does it from the things that interested her as a young Black artist living in Brooklyn and what that means. In other words, when you see a bullet hole, it's very different now after October 7th for anyone who cares a lot about Israel. But if you live in Brooklyn, you see bullet holes, it's very much about other things. So I think that's very important context. Now let's go to the next show. I want you all, my fantasy is all that we're going to see as many shows as we can, but then you do your own research. You can always email me and ask me, whatever you want. Now we're going to the next one, Thornton Dial, an artist. I love him because his career, he only made it when he was much older. I'm so curious at the end, how many of you knew? I think most of you will know only one artist we're seeing today, and that's Annie Leibovitz, who I happen to love also. But let's see Thornton Dial now.
Before we go on, there's a question about the 2 artists you've shown us and artists in general from your experience. Are these artists who were kind of recognized artists as younger people that then grew into their art? Or are they people who found art later in life, like in prison, like for some other circumstances?
By the way, whoever asked that question, I love you. I didn't plant you to do this, but I was picking very different people, and I love you for asking. So Jesse found himself in jail. The only artist who really made it quite young is Lorna Simpson, became very famous, very young, and her career only continued to grow. Thornton Dial, the next one we're seeing, was shocked when anyone wanted to buy his work when he was already in his 50s. And the guy offered him, he said, I'll sell this to you. And he said, how much are you paying? And the guy, he said, well, give it to me. I'll give it to you for $20. And he goes, no. Let me pay you $200. So that's a very different. And then you go to Annie Leibovitz, who followed the Rolling Stones and thought she was a painter, but only became a photographer later. So yay for that question. I on purpose pick people that are very different, and there are great artists who start very young. And one of my favorite stories about Louise Nevelson is she only started making it in her 60s. So they're very different trajectories. Great group, Ari. I love the questions that people ask.
You now, when I told you about if you ever seen a dead man paint, but in other words, you got to have a mind. God gave you a knowledge and power from the top of your head to the knowledge of your mind. From the top of your head, to the knowledge of your mind. He gave you a talent to do. I just love people anyway, period. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what color you are, how you look, I just care about people. That's me. Nah, that's me. I just love people. Mm-hmm. Ain't nobody else for me to love but the people. I love the people and I love my country, so what? That's all. You have to struggle in life for to make it. In other words, sometimes you didn't know where you're going to get something to eat, but you still, that's called struggling. And the Lord will fix things for you, and it come right into you. See, I have been without something to eat myself since I raised my children. I didn't know where I was going to get it from. But yet still, it came up. That day, after that day was out, I got something to eat, you know, and got something for my children. When I get my mind on drawing, I just got my mind set for it, and I just go to it, drawing pictures. And that's the way it is. I'm just going to go in there and hit something, come on out, you know, be making it. That's the way my mind be running, just like that picture. You see how that picture draw right there, you hit right quick and come out of there? So that's the way I do these paper drawing. And if I get my mind on drawing them, I just sit there and draw, you know, sit there and draw till I draw my mind blank, and then I stop.
Good.
Mm-hmm. So this is like I told you, this is the man that needs a little bit more. This, you know, this is the bionicle man. You know, the bionicle man, you know, it take electricity to run him. Okay, it take the crown to haul off what he make. Bionicle man, that's the man that got the power. You know, see, you take all this here. This is the crown. This is the crown here. See, all that's the crown. So the bionicle man can make everything he make. He had to take that. He can make it faster than you can, and he ain't gonna give out. I call that the roller mill man. In fact, being the roller mill man is something like center, big man, because the little man is waiting on the big man to bring him some work for the roller mill. So this is the roller mill man. This is a piece of tin that come out of the roller mill. So I named it the roller mill, and that's the roller mill man. So the roller mill man has to look for the little parts, the little things where it takes for to run to make different parts. That's a picture about together, all together.
Do you like that picture?
Yes. You?
Very much, yeah.
That's a nice picture. Mm-hmm. I made these pictures, man, real long time. I made these pictures. I ain't too much but talk about my pictures now, I will tell you that.
No, you don't have to talk about them, but they remind you of things in life, though, don't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you hadn't been raised by women, you'd probably be drawing other things.
Well, that's true. Okay.
One more underneath, I think.
Yeah, okay then. Y'all let me. So Bill came and he said, woo-wee, what's so pretty? I just love that. I said, well, oh, yeah. He said, give me a price on it. I said, all right. I said, he said, well, give me $25, $20 for it. He said, no, I wouldn't take that away from you for nothing in the world. I said, yeah. I said, well, give me $35 for it. He said, no, I wouldn't take it. Give me another price. I said, well, you give me a price on it. He said, well, $200 do you? I said, what? This man crazy. I said, this is crazy man here. I said, this man is crazy. My children said, oh man, I said, you done got in a whole lot of trouble now. I said, because my daddy gonna make you a heap of stuff.
Did you go to school, Thornton, when you were young? Did you spend any time at school?
Nah, not too much. I didn't spend no time at school because I didn't see too much in school for a black man. And the only thing I could see for a black man was work. And so that's most of what I ever seen in my life, working and doing things for myself. And actually, I didn't have no daddy or nothing to push me in school and make me go to school, so I just didn't go, you know. And, I just wouldn't. That's the only thing I ever did, work. If you get all those cows out there, if you raise 100 head of cows off them cows you seen out there, you can't eat them, but you can help somebody. Huh?
All right, we
You
can
always,
stop right, we can
you
stop
always
right
work
here.
at a way to help people.
He's
when
wonderful,
you
but I
dead and
only have
gone.
until
When you were
2:15, and I don't
13.
want to. You'll see the rest later. Now you'll see the show that now his work now is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I just want you to understand. And part of me minds that he sold these works for very little, and now they're considered among the most important contemporary art. And now it's getting so much attention. I took my students at SVA there. Every time I was there, the gallery was packed. And you'll see he uses found objects, he uses plastic bottles, he uses whatever he could find. He uses those rugs that were on the floor. You'll see them. They're so powerful. And he uses words in there. But see if you can blow one of those up. Yeah, I love that one. That's a rug in the background. I don't know if you can see it. And he paints these little faces. Very much like outsider art, Aboriginal art. Some people say like Dubuffet, but I wanted you to see Lorna Simpson. So I'm showing you one artist after another. One who started making art in prison. The next one who did art school, did everything the traditional way. And he worked as a worker, and he just did this as a hobby. And now that you can see the scale, very often the gallery will do this so you can see the scale of the work. And you have to understand and if you learn one thing from me, there's no one way of making art. And if you listen to me as a serious educator, that is what I want you to take away from this, that there's not one way to do things. You see, that's another one of those carpets in the background. You can see that carpet that goes on the floor, and then he paints on top of that and glues the whole thing to a wooden surface. Then there are other ones with their bottles. They're little plastic bottles. Go to the next one. I'll show you another one that I love. Go to the next. There it is. Look, I love this painting. So go close and you'll see those are plastic found bottles and string and wood, and everything is put together. And this looks very much like art brut. I do not think he was looking at art when he did these. He just had fun making them. And I think he's totally in shock that he's in now almost every serious contemporary art book on great American artists. I love the way he said, I'm an American. Anyway, it's a beautiful show. You can finish watching the video. I'm watching my time. I want to get to, I hope you don't mind the way I'm doing this. Yeah, look at that. Thank you, Ari. You see that you can see that is bubble wrap holding on to a plastic bottle. And when you look at it, it really is so beautiful. It's all fabric that he finds. None of this is bought in an art store. This is all found objects that he puts together. Now you're going to go to the video. The show is breathtaking. You get all this from us. Ari's going to send you everything, and you can read about him. Look at that. Yeah, I love that orange. Look at that pink one. Go back, Ari. I love this one too. The surfaces are just beautiful, and they're a private language. He's talking to himself, and I think that's very profound. Look, that one. I love that. Look at those colors. So he's not even thinking about color theory, but if you look at somebody by the name of Julian Schnabel, you will see that Julian Schnabel must have seen this work. And by the way, he was an underground. I knew about him years ago because one of my teachers showed us his work as a collage artist about using non-traditional materials. You think about people like Ellen Atsui, who uses bottle caps. I can't wait to spend a whole day with any group of you to bounce around ideas of how different artists are. And I hope you like him. I love him. Now let's go to, I know I'm watching my time, so let's go to the next Annie Leibovitz. Is everyone enjoying this, I hope? Just let me know. I'm shaking heads. Yay, good. I worked very hard to pick images that are all different so that somebody will find at least one thing that they like. My goal is that you see like half. Now, this is a brilliant video of Annie Leibovitz.
Leibovitz
I
is
love
possibly
her.
one of the most influential and famous photographers working in the modern era. Throughout the course of her career, she has photographed rock stars, film icons, politicians and royalty, and has in the process created some of the most iconic images of our time. Despite being known primarily as a celebrity portrait photographer, throughout the course of Annie's career, she has evolved from being a documentary style photographer through to the iconic sort of theatrical and conceptual staging that we are so familiar with today. Now in her 70s, she has been quite rightly awarded living legend status by the National Library of Congress in America. Hi there, my name is Alex and I'm your host here at The Photographic Eye. Come with me today as we explore the life and photography of Annie Leibovitz. No discussion of Annie Leibovitz's work is complete without discussing possibly her most
I'm
famous
sure you all know
photograph,
this is
and
the
that, of
most
course,
famous
is
image of her.
the image of John Lennon caressing Yoko Ono, which graced the cover of Rolling Stone magazine in January 1981. Annie had photographed John Lennon a couple of times for Rolling Stone magazine, and for this particular photo shoot she'd thought again about photographing John just as a simple standalone portrait. And when she arrived at the Dakota Building in New York, John was there with Yoko Ono. He then sort of suggested, or as he was quite forthright in his insistence, that Yoko was going to be in the photograph with him. This of course threw Annie for a bit of a loop because she hadn't really planned on doing a portrait of the two of them together. But she drew from her influences and remembered the cover of John and Yoko's double fantasy album where the two of them are kissing, along with the image on the Two Virgins cover where the two of them are displayed naked. John was quite happy to go along with this idea, and Yoko was sort of less enthusiastic and said that she would remain clothed throughout the session. And Annie produced a series of Polaroids, which obviously ended up with the now iconic image. When John saw that image, he has allegedly said to Annie that photograph encapsulated him and Yoko's relationship. Feeling quite good about the session, as you would if John Lennon had given you such praise, Annie arranged to meet the two of them later on that evening to do some more photographs in the studio. Of course, it was while she was waiting at the studio that John Lennon was unfortunately shot by Mark Chapman and rushed to hospital. And then, of course, subsequently he died from his injuries. Annie herself has said that this event was a good example of how a photograph can take on a life of its own, and that all of a sudden the circumstances around that portrait elevated it into something different and gave it a story and a depth that she couldn't do herself. Over the years, that photo has become absolutely iconic, and recently it was voted as one of the top 40 magazine covers of all time. People today are most familiar with Annie's work in Vanity Fair and through various advertising campaigns such as the one she did for M&S. The evolution of Annie's photography actually starts way back in 1967 when she moved to San Francisco from Silver Spring in Maryland. It was there that she wanted to sort of study painting with a view to becoming an art teacher. When she visited her parents in the Philippines one vacation, her mum took her off to Japan where she bought her first camera, and it was then that she sort of started to explore what photography could offer her. When Annie got back to San Francisco, she decided to take a photography workshop that was being offered at the Art Institute, and it was there after a couple of weeks of this she decided to change her majors and study photography. The photography school at the time was using the work of Robert Frank and Henry Cartier-Bresson, two world-famous documentary photographers, to shape and influence the way that they were teaching their students, and this immediately got Annie sort of invigorated and impassioned by the art of photography. Having put together a body of work, Annie was encouraged by a boyfriend of hers who worked for Time magazine to go and show her prints to Jan Wenner, who was the founder of the counterculture magazine Rolling Stone. Annie was a little bit reticent to do this, so eventually she plucked up the courage and went to go and see Jan, and he was really impressed by her photography and decided to take her on as a staff photographer. And the next week, Annie was walking down the street and imagine to her surprise that she saw her image on the cover of Rolling Stone for that issue. And of course, this was going to be the first of many, many, many covers for her. And this was probably the birth of Annie Leibovitz, the photographer with a capital P. In 1975, Annie was asked by Mick Jagger to cover their Rolling Stone North American tour. He'd said that he was looking for Annie to be something of a Henri Cartier-Bresson for them, although she wasn't quite sure at the time what he really sort of meant. Somewhat naively, the young Annie decided that this tour would be an ideal time not only to get some fantastic pictures of the whole tour itself, but also to get some much needed tennis practice in. So when she met up with the Stones in New York, she brought her tennis racket along with a view to doing some tennis practice during the day. That first day on tour with the Stones would be the last daylight hours that she saw for quite some time. Because of her background in documentary and how she'd been taught to photograph, Annie decided to become almost chameleon-like, to blend into the background and try and become part of the band. As Robert Capa had said, if your photographs are not good enough, then you're not close enough. And I think in this case, Annie, in retrospect, realized that this was probably the wrong time to be as close as she was to her subjects. She remarked later on that the whole experience was extreme with a capital E. Because of her proximity to the Rolling Stones, this also lent her a certain gravitas and power within this kind of world of the rock concert. And it was here that she started to develop quite a serious coke habit, which in later years would be quite detrimental, certainly to her time at Rolling Stone. One of the things I absolutely love about Annie Leibovitz is that her work has continued to evolve and grow throughout the course of her career. A lot of her current work, certainly from the last 10 to 15 years, has a sort of theatrical and conceptual quality to it. And this is hardly unsurprising, given that her mother was a modern dance instructor.
We'll stop right there.
And a passion for the arts has always...
So I want you to understand something. Why did I want to have, and the last artist we're not going to get to today, but Ari knows me. I like putting it as much as we can. I want you to promise me you're going to see these on your own. But the two artists, I'm showing you Robert Capa, who has a gorgeous show up right now, who was the teacher that was a big influence on her, and Jeff Wall, who spends hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up scenes where he hires everyone to be actors. I just want you to understand that there are many ways to be a great artist. And my goal for teaching these classes, and I feel very honored to be a regular here, is that I want you to understand that what makes a great artist is two things. One is that they have an original mind. Two is that they continue to grow and that they don't repeat themselves over and over again. And people say to me all the time, who are your 10 favorite artists? I have 110 favorite artists, but all of them have one thing in common, is that they find their own way to access visual language. That's number one, the most important thing. And they're telling me a story that's honest only to them. And what do I mean by that? Is they take everything, and I love that Thornton Dial said that every gift that God gives you should help you decide how you want to show your work. Annie Leibovitz is one of them. Unfortunately, she had a terrible drug addiction, and therefore she lost quite a few years of her work, and that was because of her relationship to the Stones. Let's look at the show that's up right now. We'll look at that for a few, and then I know I'm running late, so you're going to watch the rest of it on your own, but I want to go to that show for a minute. I also think it's important to see how galleries show the work. And the Jeff Wall show and the Robert Frank show, which I'm not showing you today, but you're getting it in your package, they install the photographs very differently. So let's look at the Annie Leibovitz right now. The Annie Leibovitz show is right now at Hauser and Wirth.
So two quick notes. Number one is we have someone in the audience, Angela Smith, who says they're in tears because Thornton Dial is their cousin. Just as an FYI.
Oh my God, wow.
So I wanted to share that. And then regarding what we're going to...
Wait a minute, the person who's their cousin, I loved his work forever. I am so emotional that you're in here. One of my favorite stories that happened in my life, I was talking about Eva Hess, and I was saying how important she was, and her sister was in the audience. So you made my day.
So, and then regarding for Hauser and Wirth, all I have is a press release for this that you sent me in the links.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. They don't show a lot of the work. Some galleries are very nervous because people then try and download images. And that's most probably why they didn't. I forgot that. Okay. Do we have a few minutes for some questions, or should I zoom ahead to just show them?
Let's do a few quick questions, and then we'll see how
right.
much time, because we have about 7 minutes left. So here's some quick
All right.
questions. You mentioned that the exhibit season maybe is going a little longer than it used to go. Does that mean there's fewer exhibits now, or that
Yes,
each exhibit is
well,
going longer?
That's a very good question. So now there are galleries that have multiple galleries. In other words, Hauser and Wirth has a whole building. Pace has a whole building. Jack Shaman has many spaces at different places. Listen Gallery has multiple spaces. So there are multiple spaces now instead of just one space. Some galleries have a show on the front wall, a front room, and then in the back room. But yes, most shows are going on longer, and therefore in any particular space, there are fewer per year.
Okay. Are galleries closing, or are they holding out?
Well,
Surviving?
that's an excellent question. There is a bloodbath. There was one a few years ago during COVID. A lot of galleries closed and a lot of galleries merged. What I've seen in the last few years is that galleries get gobbled up by big galleries, and the director or the owner now works for another gallery, but brings a lot of his or her own artists to that new gallery. They're more like megastores. It's like mergers. So yes, but there's still hundreds. You have no idea how much work it is for me to knock it down to 6 or 7 galleries. I get, because they all know I lecture, I get hundreds of emails a month from different exhibition spaces.
So there's a question, when you do the live gallery tours, how many galleries do you actually get to, and how much time do you,
Well,
overall is that
Ari,
tour?
I won't do it for less than 2 hours because I want to show at least 6 galleries. And then there's walking. So as a rule, I do 6 galleries in 2 hours.
Okay. How do people like Faith Hirschler find out if she's going to New York, like what's on that particular time? So she knows, is there one website? Where do you go to find out what's on in New York in the galleries?
Well, there are many, you know what? There are many ways to do it. There's, you can go out to things like, New Yorker has things, the New York Times has things, Time Out New York.
Okay, so you'll send me something and we'll share it with the group. Just so
yeah, yeah. There's more than one way.
Last question before we get to our last artist. You are a Jewish artist, and you're actually religious, and you are the connection to CSP. And yet, other than Annie Leibovitz, who I assume is Jewish, you've shown us no Jewish artists, right? So the question is, and people love it. There's no issue. No one is like upset about that, because you're exposing people to great artists.
Excuse me, Robert Frank, who I would have shown to, is Jewish also.
Okay. Oh, good. So we'll get to him. But the question is really, in the world of art, I think people believe that there is a super representation of historically a super representation of Jewish artists. So if you look at certain periods in Jewish art, and you look at the very successful ones, you have a greater representation of Jewish artists. Is that true? Like if you went back in the 50s and 60s, and has that now changed? Are you choosing in particular to show us artists we wouldn't know, but there are, like in any day, a lot more Jewish artists who are involved in art that is prominent? Or is that actually changing now because society is appreciating Black artists and people and incarcerated artists and artists who have different stories? So that's kind of a meta question.
Right. So the only time that the Jewish artists were huge were abstract expressionists. Right after World War II, the abstract expressionist movement were many, many Jews. Jackson Pollock wasn't Jewish, but his wife was Jewish. So you have Helen Frankenthaler was Jewish. I mean, there were many more Jewish artists. Philip Guston. There were many, many at that time.
Rothko.
Rothko, obviously, I forgot him. He's my favorite. Barnett Newman. I mean, there were many, many more. But right now, if you look at the reviews in the New York Times or all the major art magazines, the majority of reviews will be of artists of color, women artists, artists from Latin America. Otherness is right now the big guiding light for what gets reviewed. I want to make it really clear, and since I'm being taped, I'm always clear about this. Trends don't mean what is great art. Trends only mean what everyone's talking about. I believe there are great artists born every minute from every diverse group. I don't believe any group is better than any other group. Who gets the spotlight at any time is about trends. Now, years ago, there was something called the Cedar Bar, and there was a place to go to hang out with other artists. That doesn't exist anymore, but there are things like Skowhegan, Art Basel. There are many places that show art, or there are programs where many artists are at one place. You should know, I teach at the School of Visual Arts, and all of us that are hired there, I got hired there after my show at the Guggenheim. I was teaching at City College before that. When my career took off, I got asked to teach there because of my career. Now, sometimes you'll get great artists who happen to be great teachers, but that doesn't always work. There are other art schools that I know of, and I won't mention those names, that have artists who do not make a living as artists, but they're great teachers. I would not recommend any of my students to get their graduate degrees there. I would recommend my students, and I always do, look for who's teaching at that school. Now, in California, the state schools knew that most Californian artists were not making their living as visual artists, so they paid them very, very well. That doesn't always work, but I believe you should learn from somebody who makes art all the time. Again, right now, most of the reviews and exhibitions that are up now are of people who are other. Other is right now the moving force.
Thank you for that answer. Okay, let's do one last artist and then we'll call it a Sunday.
Why don't you go to, I see, I don't want you to think I don't have another Jewish artist, but I love Jeff Wall.
Okay,
Go
let's
to
just do
Jeff
Jeff Wall. Okay.
Yeah. And then Sean Scully, we didn't do yet, and Robert Frank, we didn't do. But Jeff Wall is a great video on Jeff Wall, and I love him. Here, watch this. This is brilliant.
Survey of a photographer who has helped change the perception of his art form. Jeffrey Brown goes to Glenstone Museum outside Washington to look at the unusual process behind large-scale works. It's part of our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Scenes of interior hidden life. Scenes of almost cinematic drama. But pull back from the frame, and the first thing you notice about Canadian artist Jeff Wall's photographs is their sheer size.
Because I was so interested in other art forms like painting and to some extent film, it seemed to me that photographs were too small, that something in them, in the medium, wasn't being released by the conventional formats, and it was exciting.
An exhibition now at Glenstone, a contemporary art museum outside Washington, D.C., shows what Wall has done since the 1970s to change the conventions of photography. What photographs aim to capture, how they do that, and yes, their scale. Glenstone's director, Emily Way Rails.
I think of them as works that straddle different categories. These things are on a scale that you would associate more with cinema in some cases, or advertising displays. They're big, they're brilliant. In some cases, they have light shining from behind them, so the colors are super saturated and they glow.
Glenstone is a private museum fully open since 2018. It's a 300-acre campus of rolling pastures and woodlands with interconnected gallery buildings. Art and nature, sometimes art in nature, as with sculptures by Jeff Koons and Richard Serra. Its spacious galleries showcase individual artists such as Robert Gober and other leading figures in contemporary art.
We like to focus on artists who we consider disruptors, artists that really changed the way people thought about art, were innovative either in their ideas or their approach or process or technique. Jeff Wall certainly falls into this category.
We were there as the exhibition was being installed. A chance to see the enormous and heavy works being lifted and mounted into place. Wall's photographs often have their own built-in light source, a so-called light box that creates a vivid backlit effect, and also turns them into three-dimensional objects, almost sculptural. He's not an artist